In the last episode of this series, I reinstalled the engine and gearbox and got the Duetto project fired up. Now that it runs, I need it to stop as well. The brakes on Alfa 105s are generally pretty sharp, especially compared to just about anything else from the era, but only when they're in good working order. A standard 1600 Duetto Spider would have ATE disc brakes all round. Single circuit, exactly the same setup as my 1300 Ti. But this Spider has a dealer-fitted vacuum booster, just like the twin car I rebuilt back in 2020. There was a batch of right-hand drive 1600 Spiders ordered in 1967 that went to South Africa and were all fitted with boosters at the dealership. This is one of those cars. Now, I'm not entirely sure how I feel about boosters. I think the brakes on my Ti are the best of any Alfa I've had. I love how direct the pedal feel is, but I do think a booster is a nice upgrade for a lot of people. However, when they go wrong, they can be a massive pain and very difficult to diagnose. They can cause vague and unreliable braking, and they can dump brake fluid and air into the number 4 cylinder. There are many ways they can become a maintenance headache. In my experience, most mechanics don't want to touch them. So along with the general service on this braking system, I'm going to rebuild this booster. So this is a part of most classic cars that people find quite intimidating, because there's like this sort of dark art about this kind of stuff where no one really knows how it works. But I thought I'd explain it as simply as I could. It's actually very easy. So this brake booster runs off engine vacuum, and the vacuum, as you're driving along, is held in this chamber here. As you're going along, this chamber is filled with vacuum on both sides, and there's a rubber diaphragm in the middle with a plunger on the end. And when you hit the brakes, there's a little low pressure circuit inside here that operates this little valve on the bottom. And all this valve does is it exposes the rear side of this chamber to atmospheric pressure. And of course you have vacuum in the front, atmospheric pressure at the back, and it will push the plunger along and actuate the pistons inside here. It's actually very easy once you understand that. The thing is, there are a couple things that go wrong with these. The seals inside them leak, maybe the main diaphragm cracks or something like that. This little rubber pipe in the bottom can split and give you atmospheric pressure all the time. Like, this is not great, actually. You can see there's brake fluid inside. Oh, yeah, something's failed in here. Anyway, one of the big issues as well is that the little piston that operates this valve in the bottom, it seizes, and then this whole thing just stops working. So I'm going to take it apart and see what of this is usable. I'm going to dip into my spares to see if I can replace some of this stuff, because I don't really have like a service kit or anything on hand. So I'll see if I can do this relatively easily. This looks pretty grim, but I'm sure it's even more grim on the inside. This clip, which someone has chrome plated to make my life difficult, holds the two halves of the vacuum chamber together, and sandwiched between the two halves is the large rubber vacuum diaphragm. It's very rusty inside here. Brake fluid is hygroscopic, so the fluid that's been leaking into the vacuum chamber has been trapping and holding moisture, causing corrosion. There should not be brake fluid inside this chamber. Clearly, something has gone wrong. If only, dear viewer, you could smell this. Old and contaminated brake fluid has a talent for getting past seals and wrecking things. When I pulled the original vacuum non-return valve off the engine, it was full of brake fluid, and I suspect the engine has been burning it too. This is the air valve. It lets atmospheric pressure into the rear half of the vacuum chamber. It too is full of old and filthy brake fluid. There shouldn't be fluid here either. but fortunately for me, the diaphragm here is in great condition. This top section of the air valve covers the little piston that actuates the diaphragm, and usually the piston is seized, and they're really tough to remove. In the past, I've had to weld a stud onto these to pull them out, but this time I got lucky. So this is the little piston that gets seized, and luckily it seems this time around it's not seized, it's coming out. There we go. Inside the cylinder, there are two sets of seals and springs for the two different chambers. The low pressure side, which opens and shuts the air valve, and the high pressure side, which amplifies the brake pressure via the big vacuum diaphragm. There's a little clip that holds the parts of the high pressure side back. The seals are a little tired, and this spring seat is broken, but apart from that, there's nothing too catastrophic here. So I'll tidy all of this up and rummage around for some spare parts. I have cleaned and electroplated the steel parts of the booster. And the electroplating might not be the best, and that's because I did it myself, but it looks a lot better than it did. I have found a new main diaphragm, some new cylinder seals, and a new spring seat. So before I assemble the cylinder, I want to have a look at the parts that go inside it. It is a little bit confusing if you don't really know what you're looking at here, but it's actually very simple in its principle. You have two sections inside here, a low pressure section, which is sort of here from the inlet through to about the middle of this cylinder, and then a high pressure section, which is only really actuated when you have pressure on this push rod from your vacuum diaphragm. And the way that this works is when you put your foot on the brake, you get the usual pressure from your brake master cylinder, which will fill up this first section. And usually, if you had no vacuum connected or anything like that, that fluid will be able to pass through the hole in this piston and then just continue on its way. And because this has a seal on the other side of it, and there's a hole in the middle of that seal, the fluid can just make its way through and continue down to the brakes sort of unboosted. But when you have the whole vacuum side connected, when you put your foot on the brake, you're going to actuate this little piston which opens the air valve and gives you your vacuum boost. And then it pushes this rod along until it comes into contact with this piston, and it seals, because that, of course, that's the tapered edge. You get a tapered seal in here. And then this will then push this seal sort of towards the end of the cylinder, thus amplifying your brake pressure. And it's really that simple. You just have... It's really that simple, but there are a few things that you have to make sure are in good working order in this thing. And you need to make sure your seals are relatively good. You need to make sure that, like, you don't have any broken parts. Like the spring seat in this was broken when I took it apart, so I've replaced that. This piston can of course get stuck. You have to make sure that that's working properly. And the biggest thing is that the mechanical seal, that tapered seal in here, it has to be perfect. So you need to have a look at this and make sure there's no rust or pitting or scratches or anything in there. And the same in this piston. And because if you're not getting a good seal there, you're never going to get the boost that you want. It's always just going to leak out and you're going to have very, very poor braking. So I hope I explained that well enough. With the high pressure side assembled, I can test it by pushing the push rod into the cylinder with my thumb over the outlet. If there's a leak in the tapered seal or in the rubber seal, it won't hold any pressure. But you can hear that when I take my thumb off the outlet on the cylinder, there is compressed air escaping. So I'm quite confident that this works as it should. Now I can install the parts on the low pressure side. I'm putting a new seal on this piston. It's important to check that the fluid feed hole in the cylinder is clear. It's very tiny, so it can block easily. Now that the cylinder is assembled, I can move on to the vacuum chamber and the diaphragm. I'm reusing the old gaskets, but I've given them a generous coating of copper gasket sealer. They should work just fine. Here's the new main diaphragm. This is new old stock that I've had lying around. It's in amazingly good condition considering it's 50 years old. As I've said before, the quality of old rubber was just on another level. The old diaphragm wasn't split, but it had deteriorated in a couple spots where it had been exposed to the old brake fluid, and I just don't trust it to last. I'm adding a little bit of rubber grease around the two halves of the vacuum chamber to help the diaphragm seal and for ease of adjustment later. Now all that's left is the air inlet valve. This diaphragm has a hole through the middle of it, which is how vacuum gets to the rear half of the vacuum chamber. When brake pressure is applied and that little piston pushes the diaphragm down, it seals against a little rubber pad, which blocks off the front side of the vacuum chamber while letting atmospheric pressure into the rear side of the chamber, thus moving the main diaphragm and amplifying the brake pressure. So the bottom edge of this part needs to be very clean and flat. So I ran it in the lathe for a minute against a file and some sandpaper. Here you can see how the rubber pad is lifted off its seal by the diaphragm, and by doing so, allowing air into the system. I don't have a new air filter for this booster, but a bit of clean cloth should work just fine. It needs to let air in, but keep any harmful particles out. Any air that goes through here will end up in the engine eventually, so it should be kept clean. But this car will not be doing thousands of miles on dirt roads, so a piece of cloth pinned into place under this retaining clip will be just fine. Plus, there's nothing on the market to replace the original filter. And with that, the booster is complete. Like I said, it's very simple. No, I'm not going to end the video without installing the booster and seeing if it works. Here's the vacuum line which goes into a new non-return valve I installed while the engine was out of the car. Up until now, it's been blocked off, and it's time to attach it. Before I put fresh brake fluid in the system, I'm going to throw on some new flexible brake lines and a new handbrake cable. These items were pretty tired, but it seemed the brake pads were almost new, so I left those as they were. Now, I won't know how well this booster really works until I drive it out on the open road. But a good test in the workshop is this. With the engine off and the gearbox in neutral, put your left foot on the brake pedal and apply some pressure. Now start the engine. If the booster is working, you will feel the pedal sink even further as the vacuum assistance does its thing. If the booster is not working for any reason, you will feel no difference. And here I can feel my foot sinking as I turn the engine on, so I'm pretty happy that this is working. And with that, I'm going to call this an episode and let you go. I hope this video can live here on YouTube and help demystify the Bonaldi brake booster and help you put yours right. I also hope it might arm you against anyone telling you they're just impossible to repair and don't bother with them because they're junk, because that's just not true. They just need a little careful attention. Right, before I go, I just want to say a big thank you to everyone who supports me over on Patreon. It is a big help, and it really is helping me turn this into a business. So I want to say thank you for that. And I want to say thank you and welcome to the new patrons. Linwood Rose, Caspar, Lawrence Biesma, and Nicholas Volkert. I really appreciate all the support, and I'll see you guys again soon. Thanks for watching.